Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Inking Out Loud podcast. For today, on episode 31, Drew and I have a very special guest with us to discuss the first half of Book 3 of The Wheel of Time, The Dragon Reborn. I'm your host, as always, Rob Santos. I'm joined by my co-host, Drew McCaffrey.
How's it going, everybody?
And I'm gonna let Drew introduce our special guest. Drew, take it away, my friend.
Yeah, so today we have with us Craig Hanks from the Legendarium Podcast. Welcome aboard, Craig.
Yeah, we do.
Woo! Hey, everybody. Hi.
And, I gotta tell you, I've played a little bit of StarCraft with this guy, and he is about the cheesiest Platinum League player I've ever encountered.
Ooh.
Wow.
Ooh. Shots fired.
Wow.
Damn, that's scathing. You know what, Craig?
Drew,
I
what's your
apologize.
ladder league? Tell me again.
Oh,
Yeah,
the last time I laddered was 2 years ago, and I was gold 1.
Oh, snap. I have to apologize.
So I'm shooting above my pay grade here.
Yeah. Drew texted me earlier this morning and said, "Hey, do you mind, Rob, if once you introduce me, I just get a chance to insult Greg, and I get to introduce him?" And I was, Greg? Oh my God, Craig, listen to me saying the wrong name for our podcast guest. Jesus Christ. He said, "I need to insult Craig. This is something you need to let me do." And I said, "Okay, all right. I'm intrigued. Go for it, my man."
Yeah, it's something we do at the beginning of every Legendarium podcast. I insult all my panelists.
Awesome.
So
awesome.
If I can dish it, I better take it.
I suppose.
Yeah.
I suppose. Well, hopefully you feel right at home now on the Inking Out Loud podcast, right?
There you go.
So, Drew, my man, give us a recap of what we've read so far.
Yeah, so today we're going to be covering the just about the first half of the Dragon Reborn. We're going to be going up to chapter 29. It's called A Trap to Spring. And basically the first half of this book, we get a lot of Perrin, we get a lot of Egwene, and for the first time in the Wheel of Time, very exciting, we get points of view from Matt Cawthon. And
finally.
Yeah, so Matt, in the first half of this, was brought to the White Tower by Egwene, Nynaeve, Elaine, and Varen, and was healed after some deliberation where Swan Sanche, the Amerlin, wasn't sure if she wanted to let him live or not. But eventually they did heal him. Egwene and Elaine have been raised to the Accepted, and along with Nynaeve have been set to hunt the Black Ajah. And meanwhile, Rand has run away from Warrane and Lan and Perrin and all the rest, and is heading toward Tyr. And so the rest of the group is chasing after him. So, we got a faster start here to this book than both in Eye of the World and The Great Hunt, in my opinion. We kind of hit the ground running with a Trolloc attack on the Dragon Reborn's camp. We get some fireworks with the Wonder Girls as they're going back to Tar Valon and encounter Dane Bornhald and the other White Cloaks. There's a lot of fun stuff that's happened so far. So, but I want to...
Yeah, see, for me, for the longest time, I would have disagreed since I'm such a huge Rand fan. And I always just want to get back to Rand. And we get such a lack of Rand for throughout this entire book, if I'm being completely honest. So for me, it kind of dragged for the first few times. But now that I'm a little more on the Egwene and Nynaeve train, now that I'm a little more on the Perrin train, things are definitely moving at a noticeably faster clip than I remember them moving.
Yeah, what do you think, Craig?
No, I think I agree with all of that, with the possible exception that I should say, I don't know if this is a faster beginning, but I've always loved the beginning of Book 2 versus this one.
Really?
Yeah, okay. I love that. Where are they? Faldara at the beginning of Book 2?
Yeah, they're at Faldara Keep.
Yeah, something about the Rand and Lan relationship and all that. So without that, I don't like the beginning of this book as much, although I will acknowledge that the excitement factor is much bigger right up front. So I'll give you that for sure.
Agreed, yeah.
Yeah. And I will note, there was a nice kind of callback with Lan and Rand at the beginning of this, where Rand is being so bitter and combative with Moiraine and with everybody, and then Lan tells him, listen, the whole world is riding on your shoulders. You got to be a man about this. And Rand immediately calms down and kind of recenters himself. And he goes, yeah, you're right. I'm doing what I have to do. And it's a really nice little touchstone that Rand has when he's around Lan. because he's, as we talked about Rob, on our Great Hunt episodes, like Lan in a lot of ways is a father figure for Rand. And while he's not around Rand for a lot of this series, when he is at the beginning of these early books, we get those moments where Lan helps center Rand and put him on the right path.
Yeah.
But what I want to talk about a little bit is the writing style that Jordan employs,
Sweet.
Especially in this book, with point of view, and how he uses a lack of Rand points of view to really up the tension. We have these small intermittent spots with Rand, but otherwise everything's from Perrin's point of view chasing Rand. And then we jump away and we go to the White Tower where nobody knows what's going on. And he does the same thing with point of view there, where he puts you in the head of the person in a conversation who doesn't know as much. So he keeps you in the dark, but in a natural way. And then there was one really cool spot that I noticed. After Egwene talks to Varen and gets the papers, about the Black Ajah, there's a very, very short Varen point of view. And even in that point of view, she kind of thinks about things in a more complete way, but trails off in, Varen's absent-minded way. And it leaves us really suspicious about her, and also really intrigued about where it's going. So I really appreciated the way Robert Jordan uses point of view in the early parts of this book.
Well, I like what you're saying, Drew, and I feel like this is kind of an important point, especially if you are an aspiring author or, a full-fledged author, and you want to know how to create tension in a narrative like this, because the central conflict in this book, it's a Robert Jordan book. There are 1,000 conflicts that are all kind of tied together. But the central one is the question of whether Rand is crazy. He's been channeling for long enough now that people are wondering, has he reached that yet? You never know when a guy is going to break and go crazy. And so if you were with Rand the entire time, it would be easy for you as the reader to say, oh, no, he's not crazy. He's obviously, I'm getting his point of view. I know exactly what's going through his head. But as you're kind of chasing after him as the reader, you're like, oh, geez, look at this trail of bodies. This may not be going the way that we wanted it to with Rand.
That's a really good point you just brought up there, Craig, because that's kind of one of my only gripes about Rand in the earlier parts of the series, particularly right here in this book. I always found it a little odd just how much more insane he felt in this book than in other books. Like, if we have him kind of, for example, the scene where he's hunting the Dark Hounds, or unless we might have actually got more than one scene concerning that, and Teleran Riyadh from Egwene's point of view when she runs into him. These few, startlingly few, but really creepy and chilling points of view that we get from Rand kept just making me think, God, he's already losing his mind. Like, is it just me, or does he feel more insane in the Dragon Reborn than he feels at any other point in the series?
No, I don't think it's you. I think this goes to, and forgive me if I have a somewhat imperfect understanding of all the timeline of this, but
that's okay.
This was supposed to be originally the ultimate chapter in the Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan planned this as a trilogy, right? And then kind of had to retrofit it later when the books became so successful that he was allowed more leash to explore the world further. So in his original outline, I could see it being the case where, he had to ramp up that crazy so that could be that conflict that gets resolved by the end of the story, right? And so later on, in books 4 through 7, 8, 9, something, we're gonna end up dialing back the crazy again because there's a lot more story to go through. But originally, this was supposed to be kind of the climax of it all, right?
So Drew looks like he wants to jump on this point like a duck on a beetle. Let's hear it. What do you got, dude?
Yeah. So I have an alternate possible explanation for this. He did plan it as a trilogy, but it was very, very early on that Tom Doherty, the owner of Tor Books, his publisher,
the big chief,
basically told him, listen, let's give you a contract for 6 books. You're not going to be able to fit this all into 3. And as the series played out, what I think the original outline for a trilogy was the first book, so to speak, ended with the Dragon Reborn. The plot for the first book in his outline covered Eye of the World, Great Hunt, Dragon Reborn. The second book, the plot covered the Shadow Rising through Winter's Heart, and the climax of that was the climax of Winter's Heart, this, without going into detail, with the Choedan Call. And then the third book was Crossroads of Twilight through a Memory of Light. And we'll talk about this more when we get to the Crossroads of Twilight episode. But narratively speaking, the structure of that book is all setup. It's all exposition and build-up in the early part of many plot lines that is all concluded in Knife of Dreams, The Gathering Storm, Towers of Midnight, etc. So, and I don't know this for sure, because I'm not one of the lucky few who's gotten to see Robert Jordan's notes, and, I'm not Therese or Linda Taglieri or anybody like that, but, maybe someday I'll get into that library there, but that is the impression that I got. That we have, in a very, very bloated manner, a trilogy structure to 14 books of the Wheel of Time.
In a very bloated manner. I could see that. I could see that being the case. But, he definitely does feel, as I was saying earlier, he just does feel more insane. And perhaps it was, as Craig was saying, it's just because we got so... if we had been in Rand's head for a lot longer, for the same, amount of time that we were in Eye of the World, in The Great Hunt, he might not seem as insane.
Right? Yeah.
So that's a good point.
I agree with that.
I hadn't considered that going forward. Or I will consider that.
And it is something to...
what about anything...
As Craig said...
Sorry, go ahead, dude.
As Craig said, it is something to consider, from a craft perspective as a writer, the way Robert Jordan uses point of view to illuminate and to hide at the same time. Because we're dealing with unreliable narrators in this, it's a third-person, limited perspective. And, we talked about this with Egwene, for instance, in the Ravens prologue back in The Eye of the World, where it's Robert Jordan kind of giving us a signpost saying, this is the kind of narrator we're going to be dealing with in these books. You have, a point of view of a 9-year-old girl who's all about being the best water carrier ever. And she's so determined and she's so excited about being the best and getting advancement early. And then if you actually read the action she's taking, she's a terrible water carrier. She's slacking off the whole time, and so we move through these books and each character remains unreliable. They hide things in their own thoughts. And at the same time, he uses those brief, like Varen, for instance. You have an Egwene point of view where she's getting this information about, the papers and the fragment about Baalzamon and the World of Dreams, but she doesn't understand anything. And then we get a very brief, maybe 2-3 paragraphs from Varen's perspective that illuminates even more about what we just learned, but raises more questions and hides the answers of them. It's so deftly done. Robert Jordan really was a master of point of view.
Yeah, well, speaking of points of view, I just realized during your explanation there, Drew, that we actually had another example of Jordan's, proclivity for building up narrative tension with only a certain few sparse points of view. We got that a lot in The Great Hunt, now that I think on it, with Jeffrem Bornhold, as he's investigating the arrival of the Shanchan, right? We got these very few, but very, very graphic and horrifying points of view that are clearly building up towards a big, confrontation towards the end of the narrative, right? That was very well done. You're right. I would say Jordan is a master at this. At this in particular, especially, he's a master.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
so do you guys have anything more to talk about as far as the writing goes?
You just went off on a little bit of a tirade, not tirade, but a bit of an explanation about Egwene there. I just realized we hadn't actually asked Craig yet. Craig,
yes.
How do you feel about Egwene, my friend?
Look, if I were but characters on a printed page, I would be pursuing her forever. I love Egwene. I love her so much.
Really?
Yeah, I love everything
Big
about her.
Egwene fan. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, I love Egwene. She's not my favorite character in the city or in the story, but she is. I find the anti-Egwene sentiment across Watt fandom to be perplexing at best and troubling at worst.
Interesting. I
Very
can tell we're going to
interesting.
have some excellent discussion points here. I'm in between you two. For a large part, I'm not a big Egwene fan, but there are certain books where I just can't deny it that I am absolutely a big fan. Probably the most notable example being The Gathering Storm. I love
Knife of
Egwene
Dreams.
in The Gathering Storm. Knife of Dreams. Okay, yeah.
She's at her absolute best in Knife of Dreams.
I don't
She
know.
has very little
Sanderson
page time, which
wrote
is
her
unfortunate.
so well
but
in book 12, though. Oh, it was so awesome.
we'll get to that discussion.
We got some time, right? Egwene, and
yeah.
I apologize for people who are like, Craig, stop talking about book 2. But we do get in this book, in the first half of this book, I'm being reminded of what happens at the end of book 2, and it keeps coming up throughout the series. We're going to see it again, especially in the first half of book 4, where Egwene's primary motivation right now is, I will not be collared again.
Yeah.
I am nobody's captive. I am nobody's slave, and she may or may not always do the right thing, and I get that. Some people think that she, is too much of, I don't want to get too much into it. She's too this or too that. But one thing I've always loved about reading Egwene is that her motivation is clear, it's understandable, and it's extremely believable. Where the most horrific thing that I can think of happens to her at the end of book 2. With the collar that gets put on her.
Yeah.
And so throughout this book, as she's kind of remembering that, reliving it, it's always been a very powerful image to me to think of Egwene that way.
Sweet.
Right.
Well, it sounds like we're actually getting close to our
agree.
character discussion. Yeah. Go ahead, Drew. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, my man.
Yeah, let's go into character discussion here, and let's
Sweet.
kick off with Egwene since we're there already.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this in our Great Hunt episodes, and I'll say it again. There are, I am a self-professed not a fan of her. I have a lot of problems with her character.
He's being very modest.
But
he loves
No,
Egwene.
wait. Can I pause you there, Drew? I want you to make
sure.
your point, but I also I want to, so that I can clearly understand what you mean. Do you mean that if she lived down the street from you, you would hate her? Or do you mean that you have problems with the way that Robert Jordan went about writing her or something like that?
It's a good question.
I mean, if she were my neighbor, we would not get along.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. If she
think
were my
Robert
neighbor,
Jordan
we
wrote-
would be carrying on a torrid love affair. So
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, girl
Well,
next door versus bitch next door kind of scenario.
until she just drops you to the curb because you don't give her what she wants anymore. But anyway, but I do think Robert Jordan wrote a brilliant character in Egwene. As you said, Craig, she's
Undoubtedly.
so believable. Her motivations hit home in a lot of ways. They're it's a really fleshed out, realized character arc across the whole series. Her motivations make sense. What she does makes sense in the context of her personality. But where my issues come in are in the areas she treats the people around her, essentially, and her hypocrisy in a few things, especially later on. But in these early books, as I was saying, I don't have as much of an issue with Egwene. There are little flare-ups here and there where she'll do something that annoys me, and I'm like, wow, this is just laying the path for where she's gonna go later on. For instance, there's one scene early on where Nynaeve makes a comment. I think it was when they were reading through the
The list.
The lists, and Egwene is being kind of foolish, and Nynaeve makes a remark, and instead of being self-aware about Egwene's foolishness, she immediately turns and insults Nynaeve
She does it a
instead
few
of
times.
owning, and it's little things like that. And to be fair, in this book and in a certain segment of the 5th book, Nynaeve is also like that. And maybe that's just
Sure.
that Two Rivers stubbornness coming out.
Could be.
You know? But for the most part, Egwene in this, I've been engaged, with her. I haven't had a problem. I especially think her accepted test was poignant, profound at points.
Yeah.
And one thing that I was really cognizant of reading through this time was the way Egwene's knowledge shapes the trials, the 3 trials that she goes through, where she'll learn something after, like in a trial or talking with Shiri immediately after, and then that brand new knowledge informs what her next fear is going to manifest as. And the big one there is the turning with a capital T, the 13 by 13 method.
I had wanted to ask you about that later in our lore with Drew. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and this ties back to what I talked about, Rob, in our Great Hunt episode around Nynaeve's, my theory of what this ter'angreal is, or was originally. And for you, Craig, I don't know if you've... no, in fact, you can't have heard that episode because it hasn't gone live yet. Essentially, what I think this was a training ter'angreal in the Age of Legends for people to get controlled circumstances on their first taste of Tel'aran'rhiod. And obviously we know from these scenes with Egwene that there is some sort of a resonance going on between the Dream Ring and the Accepted, so there's some kind of Tel'aran'rhiod similarity there. And the reason that people go in seeing their fears is because they expect to see their fears. They go in with something in their head.
Yeah.
And it manifests in the world of dreams.
Well, yeah, it uses your own worst fears against you, yeah.
Exactly. And so with Egwene here, this is just more kind of evidence for that theory, because she's just learned that it's possible for a channeler to be turned to the shadow with this 13 by 13 method, and then, 20 seconds later she goes through and her fear is about getting turned to the shadow, and it's really interesting to compare her trials versus Nynaeve's trials, because Egwene is actively building her fears as she goes through these, whereas Nynaeve, everything in it was kind of already preordained, so to speak. It was all prior knowledge, prior things in her, whereas Egwene had these things actively changing as she went through them. And I was very engaged with that. That was probably when I enjoyed reading Egwene the most in this book so far.
Can I use this as a point to jump in and extol Robert Jordan's writing style? I mean, I know we were just talking about writing style,
of course.
So I'm kind of
we
going
go
back.
all over the place, my friend.
But this is... When we talk about Robert Jordan's long-windedness, it is, I think, both his greatest strength and one of his greatest weaknesses, right? People talk about the slog and whatnot. I'm sure you guys will talk about that more in later books. And so could he get carried away? Absolutely. But on the other hand, you think about this scene with Egwene and the ter'angreal in the hands of another author and another editor, and would this have even survived into the final draft? I don't think so. They would say, no, we've already seen this ter'angreal thing with Nynaeve. We don't need this scene again. It's the same thing all over again. But Robert Jordan says, no, I need this scene in my book.
Pragmatic.
I
can see that.
I need this scene in my book because it's not about the ter'angreal. It's not about seeing the cool magic that's going on. What it is, it's about learning about Egwene and her psyche and whatnot. And so we get a few ter'angreal scenes like this, or when we get to the Aelfin and the Eilfin, there's a few versions of that with different characters. And so it's not about that situation or that device or that magic. It's about the character going through it. And in the hands of another team of writers and editors, that may not have survived. And I'm glad that it did.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. And reading through that exact part this time around, I mean, of course, there's that speculation, in book between the Aes Sedai, is what we're seeing in this ter'angreal, is this real? Of course, every woman who ever leaves the arches comes out asking, was that real? And Shiriam has a bit of speculation to offer in that point. She says, I don't think it's real. And of course, as a reader, at this point, you are also wondering, is this real? And going through this, all the way up until now, I had assumed that it was not real. It was just the Terangrial utilizing Teleron Riyadh to read your fears and expose you to them in a controlled manner. However, this time around, I realized that as we were just discussing with Egwene, she actually learned something going into this Terangrial that we didn't know before, and that was the turning. We had never even heard of such a thing before this, and she learned it inside there. She went in there with no prior knowledge of this procedure and came out knowing. Of course, she had to ask Shiriam for confirmation, and that did, as you said, Drew, shape her trial going forward. But how did she gain that knowledge in there in the first place without knowing that as she went in? Do we have any speculation?
Yeah. The only way I can kind of justify that moment where Rand tells her they can turn me is that this so this like plays into something I'm going to get into a little later in the lore segment. Okay. And this is the idea of like the worlds, the parallel and perpendicular worlds, and the fact that Teleron Riyadh suffuses them all. Okay. And that at some level in every reality there are certain truths that remain. And this is something that must be a truth that remains across the parallel perpendicular worlds and thus in the the unseen world that is between and among all of them. And that, so there is a truth that, these constructs, for lack of a better word, can speak to people, Huh. So she comes out of it with true knowledge, despite not informing it herself.
Okay.
That's the best way I can kind of put it together with the knowledge I have as a fan, right?
Yeah. It's worth thinking about in the future. Do we have anything more about Egwene that we want to discuss before we move on to somebody else, like Rand al'Thor, for example?
No, I'm good.
Let's go to Rand.
Okay. Well, I'll start us off then. His chapters in this one, as we were mentioning earlier, they're so scarce, they're so dark. We have Jordan interspersing points of view from Rand in this narrative, like hors d'oeuvres. Every single one that we got had me craving more. But most of my points about Rand here, we actually kind of did already briefly go over, and that was just my concern, with the pace of his madness and how it accelerates up until this point. It didn't feel sustainable at the time to me, having just begun the Dragon Reborn and seeing that there's still at the moment there's still, I think there were still 7 books remaining, and there were still 4 more to be published in the future. But we did kind of cover that particular point a bit already. I can see it being a really cool narrative tool, right?
Well, but it's also we talked earlier about how it's a good way of ratcheting up the tension, not knowing if he's crazy, right? Because we're not in his head. But also, as a narrative tool, you just said it. They are hors d'oeuvres that leave you wanting more. You want the main dish. You want that. And so as you are reading the other sections, especially the parent chapters where they're chasing after him, you desperately want these characters to catch him. And so you continue turning the page. You keep wanting to find out how they're going to do it because you want to catch up to him. You want to know what's going on with this guy. And so, you don't know if he's crazy. You want to get there. This was a great, great tool that Robert Jordan put in place here.
Drew? Rand?
Yeah, and so maybe my favorite thing about what Robert Jordan did with Rand in these segments is that, in these very occasional moments we get to see him, the tone, like the setting, they're all night scenes. Everything is darker. It's almost bordering on horror. This is Robert Jordan creeping into more horror fantasy territory than his normal kind of maybe it's intense action packed, but there's usually like an underlying lightness to it. And at least thus far through 2.5 books, but the Rand scenes here are very dark in tone, very intense, have a lot of disturbing implications to them. The scene with him in Teleron Riyadh where he meets Egwene, and we find out that Rand is being visited in his dreams with these doppelgangers who are trying to poison him, or his father tries to plant a knife in his heart, and he's, they're the shadow sending, kind of the implication is like either like Elaine or Egwene showed up at one point and tried to seduce him, and it's a psychologically challenging aspect to the Wheel of Time that hasn't really come along before this. The closest I would say is that moment in The Great Hunt where they find the bodies of Changu and Nidao.
Oh, that was dark.
Skinned and hanged,
Crimson Scarecrows,
and
Rictus of Pain.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, Jordan, my man.
Yeah, so it's just another way that Robert Jordan is pulling the reader along by, increasing the stakes, increasing the tension, and increasing the discomfort in the reader, where you want to find out, you want to know that Rand is going to be okay, despite all of these crazy things he's encountering, and I love that.
Yeah, we're definitely starting to see a lot more of these straight up, just I guess, intimidating signs of Rand's effect on the pattern at this point too. And I keep forgetting that both of the false dragons that were racking the world at this time, they just mysteriously, they were defeated under unlikely and exactly similar circumstances in battle under the visions of Rand versus Baal-Zaman in the sky. The world finally has its dragon, and the pattern at this point is just basically going, move, bitch, get out the way, right? Like, we don't have room for you anymore. We've got the OG. He's in the house. So I found that pretty cool.
You and I read this book very differently.
Did we? That's okay. That's why we have...
No, I'm kidding.
Go ahead, dude.
I just didn't read it like a gangster, that's all.
No, that's fine. But we bring everybody together to get, like I said, the flavor of life, the overall experience, right? It was really, really, like I said, just intimidating to see all these things that are happening around Rand, involving Rand, that have nothing to do with Rand. Well, they have everything to do with Rand, but not caused by Rand, and that's just,
But it's the pattern, yeah. It's the pattern, shaping events around him and not necessarily even near him, all across the world. Like, this is, again, like back in our Eye of the World episode, we talked about, the idea of the Forsaken being able to track Taviran. And I, made the point that at the time, Baal-Zaman couldn't find Rand necessarily because they weren't that strongly Taviran yet. Here is where we're seeing Rand finally manifesting this, like, pattern-altering strength, where he goes through a town and the town goes mad.
That's right, it wasn't this
for the time that he's there, and even when he's, the first time that, he does that, it's the weddings, right? And then the White Cloaks come through, and the White Cloaks all go insane. Half of them try to, like, start raping women in the streets, and the other half are trying to stop them. Some of them are trying to burn down the inn. Some of them rip off their cloaks and renounce the light and, like, and ride off. And it's just utter madness. And even at the same time, that's just in Rand's vicinity. But the effects of him being Taviran are rippling all across the pattern and affecting far-flung countries. And it's kind of like an important signifier for his character development that he's not actively doing this, but this is something that is a consequence of his bare existence. So it's something he's going to have to deal with moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else Rand concerning that we want to get out of the way? Now, we don't really have much of Rand at this point. Well, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to discuss in part 2, but at this point, I mean, I think we've pretty much gone over everything that there is to go over concerning Rand.
Other than the fact that he uses Balefire for the first time on page.
Yeah. Well, was that the first time he didn't use it in? Well, no, I guess he couldn't have used it at the end of the Eye of the World. What am I thinking?
Was it?
He did indeed. He used it for the first time on page.
Was it in Great Hunt that Moraine uses it on Darkhounds?
Yeah, she does. Well,
no, that is coming up in the second half.
Oh man!
Of
spoilers! Oh boy!
That's okay. We've already spoiled some bigger things in the future, right?
Yeah, no,
we're not. I guess this is something that we really haven't said on episode yet, right here. As you know, per the structure of the last episode so far in our Wheel of Time read through. We're not going to go haywire with spoilers for the future, but we're not shying away from them either unless we have somebody on the podcast, a special guest who has not read the Wheel of Time. Craig, you are very familiar with the Wheel of Time.
Ish.
So we can discuss spoilers, no big deal. Yeah. We'll try to keep them in context, but go nuts, dude.
It always makes me uncomfortable for somebody to say, you're very familiar with the Wheel of Time when I'm sitting here staring at Drew.
Well, there's a difference between very, very familiar and Drew McCaffrey. There's still a very clear line to be drawn there, right? Like, I would say I'm very familiar with the Wheel of Time. I'm not quite on Drew's level, but I know my stuff.
Oh, gee whiz, guys, you're making me blush.
Yeah, well, that's just the booze.
Yeah. Pound another drink down for me there, man. I'm kind of going a little stingy today myself.
But yeah, no, this was the first time on the page in the Wheel of Time that we see somebody use Balefire when Rand kills the Darkhound. So
interesting.
That's my final point about Rand. But I really want to talk about Matt Cawthon because
cool.
I mean, this is the first time we can. We never got any points of view about him before this.
Well, I mean, we did talk about Matt in previous episodes, but we didn't get any kind of in-depth information about Matt.
Right.
So can I kick this one off because I've got a question for you guys.
Sweet.
This is another unpopular opinion time with Craig Hanks.
Ooh.
I like Matt. Okay, so my unpopular opinion is not that Matt is dumb or anything like that. So I like Matt. I like reading his chapters. I get it.
All right.
However, I think he's somehow overrated. So he's cool, but he's just not that cool. Or his chapters aren't that great. And I feel like his story throughout the entirety of the Wheel of Time is kind of it's really summed up well in the fight with Galad and Gawain, right? So if I can summarize a little bit, he's taken to the tower and they got to heal him of the link that he has with the dagger-hilted ruby, or ruby-hilted dagger. What? Oh, man. I'm not even the one drinking on this episode.
Dagger-hilted ruby.
So it depends on which end you hit the other guy with, right? So he gets cured of that connection, and it's this intense scene, and then he's kind of convalescing, and the first thing he does after he's healed is he goes and he grabs a quarterstaff and whips Galad and Gawain out in the training yard. And it's a cool scene. It's very exciting and all this. And when you go on Reddit, or you go to JordanCon, or you go to wherever the Wheel of Time fans congregate, and you say, what are the best scenes in the whole series? And a few people will throw out, the cleansing of Sidene, or the killing, what's the guy in book 14, whatever, the land murders.
Dumai's Wells, or
Dumai's Wells, right? But then so many people will say, when Matt whips Galad and Gawain, and I'm like, it was great. Please don't misunderstand me. It's great. It's fun. I like the scene quite a lot, but I've never understood. Is it kind of a groupthink kind of thing where people are all just following each other? I don't know. Where did this come from? And do you guys feel like it's merited that scene is so great?
So,
go ahead, Drew. I'll let you answer that one first.
So I think where a lot of the love of this scene comes from, and part of the reason that it's not universally beloved, but for the people who think of it, it is, as you said, Craig, like a top scene in the series, is that for the people who read this book as perhaps young teenagers, the kind of people who are reading the Wheel of Time as 13, 14-year-olds, right, are generally speaking probably not going to be football players or hockey players or, basketball. Like, they're not the jocks. And in this scene, Galad and Gawain, in a lot of ways, stand in for the jocks. And this is a wish fulfillment scene.
I guess.
It is essentially... It is a time where the underdog takes on the supremely overconfident jocks that everybody around is adoring of. You have, the cliques, the Aes Sedai and the Accepted standing there drooling over Galad,
Okay,
and then
yeah.
Matt is the character that, as, say a 14-year-old, maybe awkward, maybe, you're introverted, you don't love social settings, whatever, you can step into his shoes and beat up the jock.
So,
and I think that's why so many people love this.
That's a really good explanation. All right, I buy it.
I find that so fascinating that you consider Gawain and Galad to be the jocks, and I can kind of see it. They're not ever rude, which is something I always, consider. That I always see in people that I consider jocks.
What?
Okay, they're
a different high school
dismissive
experience because, I mean, the
I consider jocks to be rude, and Galad and Gawain haven't been outright rude until he challenged them, and then they were very insultingly dismissive. I will admit that, definitely, of course.
Well, I want to hear what Craig was saying.
Oh,
here.
no,
sorry, did I cut you off? Dude?
One of my abiding memories from high school that was years ago, was that the popular kids, the jocks and the whatever, they were always outwardly nice, always. And it was, it was always kind of that undercurrent of dickishness that you detected.
Okay. No, you got me with that.
That is exactly my experience as well. And I will say, I also, I had a little bit of that experience reading The Wheel of Time. I will admit, I picked up these books when I was 11 years old, about to turn 12. I was obsessively rereading them through my teens. And I was, in a lot of ways, a nerd, right?
Weren't we all?
I was kind of a late bloomer, right? I was short and scrawny, skinny kid. But at the same time, I had, kind of a maybe different high school experience because I was, a varsity hockey player. And, I had friends, good friends, in some of the more, jock groups in high school. But I wasn't ever part of those groups.
Sure. Drew, you weren't one of those jocks. No. You were a cool jock.
Yeah, he was a nice one.
No, well, that's my point. Is I wasn't a jock at all. I mostly hung out with
would a jock
the
ever
gaming
admit to being
club
a jock,
kids.
though?
And
no jock sees themselves as being a jock, do they?
Oh,
I'm just fucking with you, dude. I'm just pulling your leg over here.
Trust me, there were guys I grew up playing with who were their identity was, I am a hockey player.
Yeah.
That was their whole identity. There were hockey players listened to certain kinds of music. Hockey players had certain kind of hairstyles. The hockey flow was a thing. No joke. Google this. Every year, the Minnesota high school state tournament, there is an all-hair team voted on and selected.
How the hell did we arrive on hockey?
I know that we're going kind of far afield, but that's what I mean about the identity of a jock.
Sure.
And so that's as a Wheel of Time reader, growing up, many people could see Matt as a stand-in, an idealized stand-in, a Mary Sue, so to speak, for themselves. I'm not saying Matt is an idealized stand-in for Robert Jordan because that guy was amazing. I don't think he had any issues with his, but in that scene specifically, Matt was that stand-in that allowed people to have this moment of satisfaction seeing the jocks, quote, so to speak, taken down a rung or two.
No, I think you actually just nailed it. Now that I consider it, think about, contextually speaking, just the manner in which Matt is described in this book. I mean, he's sickly, he's weak, he's emaciated at this point. He's not very strong. He is dismissed. He is kind of treated like, I don't know, furniture more than anything else.
Yep.
And when you mentioned, Drew, the cliques that the Aes Sedai form, as they're all watching Galad and Gawain, specifically Galad, work the forms in his sword. As a 13-year-old boy, I was reading that, and I absolutely was going, you you word that I'm not going to say. Like you. Yeah. No, I now that you mention it, and it was kind of like a little bit of pseudo like fan service, wasn't it? Just tossing Matt in there, giving him a quarterstaff, and watching him just ping ping bowls. Didn't he consider it like going down? I think he described Gowan going down like pins in a game of bowls, or something like that. That might be a future going on in the future. Oh no, that might have actually been in Lord of Chaos. Matt does that to somebody. Hold on, we'll bring that up.
Yeah,
I will say
that's not in this scene, but
one complaint that I do have with this scene, and like I said, I do enjoy this scene. I think it's a lot of fun, but as long as you guys are cool with talking a little bit of spoiler stuff, in book 4, Matt is going to go into Ruidion. He's going to go meet, I can't remember, is it the Eelfin or the Aelfin or whoever gives him the
in Ruidion, it's the Eelfin.
Okay, so he goes in there,
in
and he gets this badass weapon. It's the staff with short swords on both ends and whatnot.
The blade on the end.
And he and Rand, on their way out of Ruidion, are immediately set upon by these dust creatures, and they're running around, whipping their weapons through them. And it's described in that scene that Matt seemed to already know how to use this weapon, and it's kind of this foreshadowing that he's got these memories of the old generals in his head and all this stuff. And it's a great scene, but it is slightly undercut by this, because it would have been even better, I think, if Matt had been kind of a worthless weapons know-nothing, right? He doesn't know how to wield anything. He doesn't know how to fight. Suddenly he comes out of his experience with the Eelfin, and he is a badass with this Shandarai thing. That would have been a little bit...
interesting.
A little bit different, I guess, and people can debate about whether it would have been better. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it might be a little bit undercut by this scene.
I had never considered that before, but I see what you're going at there. Yeah. But I want to kind of take this as a little bit of a leaping off point as far as Matt's memories go. We get a full-on italicized memory scene from Matt in this book.
Yep.
And in fact, it's like literally the first point of view we get for him, and it is him fighting at the Tarandrel along with the remnants of Manetheren in their last stand. And I want to address perhaps a misconception that a lot of fandom has.
Ooh, okay.
And
Professor
there's
Drew's
reason
in the
for
house.
it. There's a reason for it, because in the first couple of books, there are a lot of things about Matt that point toward, like, Aemon, right? The last king of Manetheren. But a lot of people see this scene as, this is Matt having his memory of Aemon. But it's not Aemon in this scene.
I didn't get that.
Aemon died at Emond's Field.
Yeah, that's why it's called
Emond's Field. It was originally Aemon's Field, and he died with the Band of the Red Hand around him. This memory Matt has is of an unnamed captain of the Heart Guard, not the Band of the Red Hand. And this is an elite cavalry unit, in the Manetheren military. But what this is, as we get, is the continuation of Matt's soul, the gambler with a capital G. We have Arthur Hawkwing when the heroes are summoned at the end of the Great Hunt. He addresses Matt as gambler. And this is something, through quotes from Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, over the years, there is a specific soul that is spun out again and again and again, not a hero of the Horn, but it is a special soul called the Gambler that has inherent luck.
Even the Eelfin call him Gambler. Go, son of battles, go, trickster, go, gambler, go, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so Matt's Taviran, I'll just let that sit, and I'll address the Taviran stuff in the lore section at the end of this episode.
Okay.
But I just want to talk about that. Matt is not necessarily like Aemon Reborn. He does have the old blood, for sure, from Manetheren. He's got the old tongue coming out, all of that. But this memory is not from Aemon. It's from an anonymous captain of the Heart Guard, this elite cavalry unit.
Sure. Something that struck me before we get too far off course, before we leave our discussion with Matt, I did want to say that I noticed something about Matt that I found kind of separates him from other characters in my head, with the exception of Nynaeve, who strikes me in this same way. That's that with Matt, in the start of his narrative, he is already perfectly Matt. And I went on to say in my notes here, Jordan went on to this character, I think, knowing that voice already, knowing it and employing it so well, from his written internal dialogue, his dry cynicism, his idle fancies. Matrim Cawthon in book 3 still feels like, well, okay, not the Matt Cawthon from the Sanderson books. Well, that's a whole other discussion for later. But he does still feel like the Matt Cawthon that we see for the rest of the series as it was written by Jordan. Like, that character, that voice remains very consistent to me, and that's something that I found like with Nynaeve as well. That voice remains very consistent with characters like Rand, with Perrin. He clearly had a very good groundwork laid. He clearly knew where he wanted them to go, but I don't feel like they read as perfectly themselves as Matt does right from the get-go. And I think, okay, maybe that could be because we didn't get any of Matt until book 3, and by then Jordan was already at a gallop, narratively speaking. But I just wanted to give that a shout out. Like, Matt still feels immediately from page 1, from the first sentence, from when he first opens his eyes after the healing, he's so Matt. What about you guys? How do you feel?
I think you're absolutely right. I'm sure that comes from, just like you said, he'd already written 2 books. Even if he didn't,
so he was
even if he didn't do any point of view stuff for Matt, he knew the character. He'd written his dialogue at least, and so he knew exactly who he was.
Yeah, Drew?
Yeah, definitely.
Matt still feels like Matt until a certain point.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. In fact, like, these early Matt chapters, basically his time in the tower and then in Tarvalon, and then up until he gets on the first ship, that is like some of the most quintessentially Matt.
Very poignantly Matt, would you say?
Yeah, that we get in the series. So, I'm right there with you.
I do like that because of who his character is, and as you say, how well drawn and what an individual he is, and how well we know him right away. It's awesome to have him at the beginning of this book in Tarvalon, because up till now we've seen some White Tower stuff, and we've seen some of their machinations and the lies or the half-truths and all this stuff, the shady dealings of the Aes Sedai, and it takes a character like Matt coming in to show you just kind of how ridiculous it is. He's the guy that comes in
to filter it a little differently,
and he just laughs at him and says, "No, you're all ridiculous. You're ridiculous." And I'm out of here. The second I can get up out of this bed, I'm out of here, because I don't want to deal with it.
Which kind of frustrated me about Matt, just the fact that he was so ready to leap out of bed when he could barely stand up. It's like, dude, use 3 of your brain cells. I know you've got them available. Come on, dude.
Anyway, but I think from a reader's perspective, at least from this reader's perspective, and I know maybe a couple other people I've talked to, the White Tower, whatever its faults are, you are, as a reader, in awe of it. And it's this untouchable center of power and wonder and all this stuff, and you have a character like Matt come in, and he kind of just lifts that veil off of Tarvalon and says, no, for all of its wonders and powers and all that, it's still just kind of a collection of ninnies at the end.
Craig, I have to say, the moment you said the word machinations, immediately, I just thought, hey, machinations.
Is that a parody of the Macarena?
Yeah. It was something that came up on our episodes, our Wheel of Time episodes. It was...
was it?
Yeah, that's got to go on a t-shirt at some point, I think.
Yeah, probably.
We're gonna have to tell Craig all about our Deus Ex Domon.
Oh yeah. That's the nickname for Bail Domon, because every time he shows up in the series, he's there to be like an easy
makes
out
sense.
For whoever needs it.
Makes sense to me.
It's already happened more than once at this point, and it's still not over.
Yep. Oh yeah.
I want to also. Go ahead, Drew.
Well, I was gonna say, unless we have anything more about Matt, we should move on with our characters.
Just
we're getting
awesome scene
pretty deep in here.
Yeah, I just want to say I got a definite kick out of the one-on-one between Matt and the Amerlin immediately following his healing. She straight up tells him what she wants to use him for, and he, understandably freaks out a bit. He's blood and ashes, blood and bloody ashes, and then Swan just calmly looks at him. She puts her chin on her knuckles, and she says, "Would you prefer the alternative?" And he takes a moment to think about it, and he just goes, "Oh, you want me to blow the horn? I'll blow the horn. I never said I would not blow the horn, did I?" We get such a good feel for the character of Matcham Cawthon just in that one exchange. I loved it. So that's everything I wanted to say about Matt.
Yeah, I'm there with you. And I'll add one more thing. There's a line in there that I think absolutely sums up Matt's character when he says, "I am not a hero, but I will do what I have to do." Sure. And Swan replies and says, "Most heroes say that."
Yeah. Most heroes are just people doing what they need to do. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, who are we going to talk about next?
I think we need to talk about Perrin because he's our other major point of view character. I will say I don't have a whole lot to discuss about Perrin.
Actually, I didn't write anything down about Perrin, but I could still give impressions.
As long as we get to Moiraine, that's all. That's my only wish.
Oh, all right. Of course, Craig wants to talk about Moiraine.
We'll get to her in just a sec.
Yeah, we will. But with Perrin, most of the first half of this book, his character arc is just him dealing with the wolves, and then being a vehicle for us to follow the chase after Rand. So he doesn't have like a super complex presence on the page in the first half of this book. We get a couple of really powerful scenes, I admit. We have when the Trollocs attack the camp in the mountains, and we have that really ominous "the twisted ones come, brother. Twisted ones come." But the main scene for Perrin here is meeting Noam. Because that is a formative moment for Perrin's entire psychology going forward, is that he is now seeing somebody who has utterly given themselves over to the wolf. And Perrin now is afraid of that, and he sees that as something that could happen involuntarily. So that's going to be a giant internal conflict going forward for a lot of this series. And
it all starts
and it's all because of this one scene. Because the first wolf brother he meets is Elias, who's perfectly normal,
ish,
mostly well-adjusted. He's a little reclusive, but he's not like a wild animal. He's
found his balance.
He's in control of his humanity. Mm-hmm. So. But Perrin, having Elias as his first, as his introduction to Wolf Brotherhood, it's easy for him to forget about that when he stumbles over something scarier and more unknown. And that's going to inform him going forward. And that, I think, is maybe more than any other moment in this whole book. And that's like a pretty big statement for me to make, because there are a couple of pretty key moments for Perrin in this contentious book. I think it is the most important moment in the Dragon Reborn for Perrin.
Is this not the book where he meets Fail?
Yes,
it is the book where he meets Fail.
Yeah, because for the entire rest of the series, and this is kind of my rant about Perrin. Perrin is a great character, or at least he's a very well written character, in that Jordan never lost sight of who Perrin is. Perrin is relentlessly bullheaded and not clever and single-minded and all this stuff. He's not Matt. He's not Rand. He's not Moiraine. He's not any of these people.
He's very distinct.
He is, and Jordan never lost sight of that, and so he never ended up accidentally writing Perrin to be cleverer or more interesting than he actually is, and that's to his credit. but on the other hand, it can make him just a chore to read sometimes.
Yeah.
And this isn't so much a problem in this book, I don't think. I think it comes into play later, but it's those two. I would point to two events. It's meeting Fael and meeting what's his name? The wolf guy?
Noam.
Elias?
No, Noam.
Noam. In this one.
Those two events become the things to which he constantly refers throughout the rest of the series.
Yes.
And so where some people get, they kind of raise their eyebrows or snicker a little bit at all the braid tugging or the arm folding or whatever. My thing is, like, my abiding memory of Perrin is like, shut up about Noam, shut up about Fael.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have another thought.
Thank you so much. I've been waiting for somebody to properly articulate exactly how I feel about Perrin being such a crybaby bitch for the rest of the series. All right, now, and I'm really glad that you brought up.
Oh my gosh.
This exact point, because this is something I noticed about Perrin's character in this book too, where he is as a person, not just mentally speaking, but literally geographically speaking. Perrin's narrative over the entirety of the Wheel of Time gets kind of a full circle thing happening here with his meeting of Noam. Because in Towers of Midnight, and this is a book that I loved, but I found the biggest complaint I had about Towers of Midnight was how much Perrin it had in it, because at that point I wasn't a huge Perrin fan. And it does come full circle because, the events, everything that happens in Book 13 kind of focus on this exact same stretch of land, and they're currently in Gildan, correct? This is where he found Noam on the Johanna Road or whatever.
They are in Gildan. Yep.
So, I did want to bring that to the forefront here and say I appreciated going into it this time. I know where Perrin's going to end up, and I know how everything that's happening in this location in Gildan, everything that's happening to Perrin in the first half of the Dragon Reborn, is going to eventually have a full circle, and it's all going to come back and have it's not going to end, but it's going to have an ending back in this same spot. So I found that pretty cool.
Yeah. So shall we move on to Moiraine then?
Yes.
Because I know Craig is chomping at the bit here.
Let's give Craig his chance.
No, I guess I'll just kick this off by saying that if Egwene and I are having a torrid love affair, then it's probably Moiraine that I'm stepping out on, because, Really?
You are more of an Egwene fanboy than Moiraine?
No, not at all. Egwene is just a dalliance. Moiraine is my one true love.
Okay, good, because this is something that I wanted to ask you, especially you, Drew, earlier too. But, with our special guest, one of whom was Drew's wife, I didn't consider it totally appropriate to ask him this at the time. Sorry, Lauren. But come on, Moiraine, biggest teenage fantasy crush ever.
I'm 33 years old, and
no, but I'm sure you discovered her as a teenager. Oh, how actually? I should have asked you that. Right. When did you start reading?
I didn't start reading until I was 27. So.
Well, 27-year-old Craig and 13-year-old Rob agreed on a lot of things, my friend. Let me tell you.
I'm not loving what you're saying about me here. That's just cruel.
No?
No,
you have to insult,
I
right?
will tell you, though,
okay. With all of that, with all of my Moiraine love out of the way, I do suspect that this book is where a lot of people get the most ammunition for their distaste for Moiraine, because I know there's a lot of it out there. In this book, sure. But the way that she mishandles Rand, the way that she kind of goes with that whole situation at the beginning of the book, I think I can understand why people don't like her. For me, that's one of the things that actually makes her a really great character, is that she is far from infallible, right? But anyway, I wanted to ask you guys about that kind of the fandom's love and hate for Moiraine, and where that comes from, and where you feel like she is in this book.
So Drew, I'll let you tackle that one first.
Yeah. I feel like I fall along a spectrum with Moiraine. I do not understand the unabashed love for Moiraine that a lot of people have. I also absolutely don't understand the hate people have for her. I think she gets almost too much credit for being brought back at the end of the series. Because, like, people love her so ardently, and she's not even there for, like, half the friggin' series.
She's Moiraine,
and a lot of what she does isn't all that impressive to me. She has her moments, but early on especially, she is a little too caught up in Aes Sedai-ness. And while she does have her moment of realization in a couple of books here, and, you know, is willing to compromise for the first time, that's a great character growth moment. I think that's awesome. I like Moiraine, but I don't love her the way some people do. You know, let me give you a character that I like Moiraine on a similar level to. Somebody like Davram Bashir.
What?
Yeah.
What the hell did you just say, boy?
No, I don't have
I
anything against Davram Bashir. I just think it's an odd comparison.
Nor do I.
Well, so that's what I mean.
Like,
I like her. I think she did some really important things. And I think Davram Bashir did some really important things. And it doesn't go beyond that for me. And so, like, Rob, when you're talking about, like, you know, this teenage crush, like, I never had a crush on Moiraine. Never, ever.
What?
The characters I had crushes on in this series
is wrong
were
with you?
Elaine and Aviendha.
Okay, Elaine and Aviendha, I can see. Yes, but they weren't, like, Moiraine level.
Oh.
Damn, dude. God, okay.
Like, Aviendha, especially, like Aviendha, man.
See, with Moiraine, it was, I guess, just her position of power, her serenity, you know, like, her how small she is of stature, but how big, how large she is.
Yeah, that's book one.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, I just Moiraine. Moiraine.
I will also put this out there. Part of it comes from, like, my
what the hell?
proclivities, like the kind of girls I'm attracted to. I'm 6'4".
Oh, sure.
Moiraine is super short.
She's like 5 foot
like,
on the dot, right?
Yeah, like I'm not into that. When I hear, like, Aviendha's, like, almost, like, taller than Matt, I'm like, oh yeah, here we go, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I can see that.
So,
and Brigitte as well. But,
so let me riff on something you said. You said, Drew, that she doesn't do that much that's that impressive and all that. That's
where I went.
A
what?
Debatable point for sure, but. My thing is, look, if you want to understand true love, Drew, if you really want to understand it,
yeah, Drew,
it's not about, like, you know, okay, look, I've got kids, and so
listen to what this man says.
I'm intimately familiar with Thomas the Tank Engine, and if you ever watch those, like, the end of every episode of Thomas the Tank Engine, somebody saves the day, and then the mayor guy, Sir Topham Hatt, comes and says, "Congratulations, you were a very useful engine." And that's, like, the measure of love in Thomas the Tank Engine. It always drives me crazy. Like, oh, because they performed some act, now they're worthy of your love. You know, my thing with Moiraine is that I do like her personality, and every once in a while she lets that Aes Sedai serenity slip, and her natural personality comes out, and it's interesting and wonderful.
Like shaking in excitement over here. Yeah.
And she acts throughout the first several books of the series as a great window into what it means to be an Aes Sedai, and so you get to see nothing but that kind of Aes Sedai calm and serenity, the power that she has as she's guiding the youngins through book one. And then as the series progresses and she more often lets that mask slip, then you kind of, as a reader, it's giving you a chance to see through her what the Aes Sedai really are. No, they are individuals, and they do have personalities, and they do act in certain ways as individuals. And so she is not only somebody that I like, personally, but she's also a great device that Robert Jordan uses to give us a window into the Aes Sedai.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, for the majority of the series, and this is something we had discussed earlier in our, especially in the Great Hunt episode, I think it was, I brought this up. So, basically with Moiraine here, you're absolutely right. She's kind of held up as like the quintessential, the model Aes Sedai, and not counting all of the incredible feats that she does. She kills one of the Forsaken. She finds not only the Dragon Reborn, but the future Amaryllis.
She is
as well.
a
like,
very useful engine.
She is just a phenomenally, useful narrative tool. Absolutely. She is wonderful. But something I had said about Moiraine in earlier episodes was, especially with her relationship with Lan, and what I want to say about that is, she and Lan represent to me, despite the fact that there is absolutely no hint of any kind of romantic interest between the two. She and Lan are still to me kind of like the ultimate fantasy power couple, just because of those jaw-dropping moments of awesome that we get when we see Moiraine and Lan fighting back to back. You know, we see Moiraine throwing balls of fire. We see Lan carving out, Trolloc flesh in a wall around her. I mean, like, those two together just represent to me everything about the male and the women, the men and the women of the Age of Legends, and how this whole overarching theme throughout the series of men and women working together, being synergetic in outcome, and how they have they work to create something more than the sum of their parts. And with Moiraine, she just exemplifies that again and again. Like, she is to me like the perfect Aes Sedai.
See, I do not disagree with anything you guys said there, and in fact, I very much agree with what you said. But I just don't have the love for her character that, like.
Okay, that's
like,
fine. No,
to me, she just doesn't have the screen time. Like, there's not enough of Moiraine in this series for me to say, like, she's my bae. Like,
okay, look.
Just say bae?
None of us are young enough to use that word.
Oh my goodness. Andrew McCaffrey. But what about the scene where, take the scene where Moiraine joins Perrin and Loial in catching fish from that stream or the pond or whatever. Did you not just fall in love with her in that scene?
No.
No? Like, I love how she screwed with their heads by asking for advice first.
Oh, no, it was
and
great.
And then she just crushes their hopes and dreams. And there's that image of her actually, like, wrestling with that big, wriggling 5-pound fish, and she's laughing in delight. Like, I was just like, this woman's awesome. She's awesome.
You know what, Rob? There's no arguing with bad taste. So.
Right? Yeah. I get the feeling you're making fun of me here. Hold on a sec. Back up. No, I'm just kidding.
No. I'll give you guys your Moiraine love. I'm not gonna deny it. I'm not gonna say that she's not a character that people can latch on to. She just didn't do it for me.
But I do get people's frustration with Moiraine, with her complete lack of transparency in this book. Like, come on, like, give them something to go on. Why does she have to carry on so many secrets? Why is it on such a need-to-know basis with everything around Moiraine? That's one complaint that I guess I'll balance out my Moiraine love with.
She's on a journey, okay? She's on a journey. She's going to keep learning. You'll talk more about this in Book 5, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There'll be lots in Book 5 to discuss, yep.
But, so as far as characters, is there anybody else we want to talk about before we move into kind of the lore element of this?
I just wanted to give a shout-out to Pedron Nile. I love that guy. In the prologue, oh my god, the experience that we've had up to this point of the majority of the White Cloaks thus far, I remember being incredibly surprised that their Lord Captain Commander was such a calm, reasonable, clever old man with a mind like a knife. I mean, it was awesome. Everything about that prologue was superb. The description of the banners on the walls from enemies defeated in battle, such a neat way to present like another of our 5 great captains. The sunburst and the floor and the unimaginable wealth that he just doesn't even deign to notice. I really, really got a kick out of, not a kick, but I just really found him, I was kind of reverent, I suppose, just reading Pedron Nile's chapters.
That's really interesting,
it was awesome.
The way you describe that and the way you describe feeling about it, because I don't know, I'm sure one of the two of you could educate me on this, but I don't know Robert Jordan's religious leanings. I don't know how he felt about organized religion and that sort of thing. But I know that this description of the White Cloaks is the way that a lot of people view organized religion. And if we use the Catholic Church, for instance, as a stand-in, but you could use a lot of Protestant churches as well, a few other organizations that I won't name, but they see it as a few clever old men who kind of are able to use the slavering masses of zealots at their command to try to take over the world, right?
BR.
Yeah, and so the way that Pedro Nile is drawn seems very much in that vein of every white cloak that we've come across has been this crazy zealot who's ready to, burn witches at the stake at the drop of a hat. And now Pedro Nile is like, oh, yes, exactly. I'm able to use these tools to the best of my advantage. And so I wonder if there's some sort of editorializing going on and, what this says about the way Jordan views organized religion.
True?
Yeah. Robert Jordan was a devout Christian. As I have read, he was kind of guy who received communion weekly, and he was also a Mason, a Freemason.
That I didn't know.
Yeah, he, I will also say, was definitely drawing a parallel with the White Cloaks to religious zealotry. That's something I think, Craig, you're spot on with.
That can't be argued. Yeah,
but I don't know if necessarily he was trying to make an argument against organized religion as a
maybe just an observation,
but more of an observation on what happens when organized religion exceeds its bounds.
Sure.
When you have, like you said, burning witches at the stake, like a puritanical or like a Spanish Inquisition. That's the really popular comparison made with the White Cloaks. But Robert Jordan was a Christian, so I don't think he was implicitly arguing against his own faith.
Right. No, yeah, and it's I wasn't making an argument that he was. I just was wondering out loud.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Inking.
As far as Pedro Nile,
you didn't do that. All right, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I was there.
It was great to
mic drop.
It's great to be on the show with you guys. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no. As far as Pedro Nile goes, though, Rob, it's funny because you brought up how much
Bornhold.
He's kind of a an impressive figure.
Yeah.
And I had that impression a lot, over the years as I've read this book over and over and over again. And, maybe, again, as I've said, I haven't touched the Dragon Reborn in 4 years. The majority of my rereads were a decade ago.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a very different person now than I was as, a teenager in high school and going into college. I'm 29, I'm an adult, professional, I'm married, I have a very different worldview. And the thing now that stood out to me with Pedro Nile was how he comes across. This is another prime example of the unreliable narrator with Robert Jordan. He comes across as so thoroughly in control. And yet, as you read through, and then Fane comes in, and you realize all of this thinking and scheming and planning has been informed and twisted by Padan Fane.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this guy who's so formidable and competent is totally undermined.
Yeah,
he's corrupted.
I got exactly that impression coming out of it this time, because reading that chapter, I was like, oh yeah, Pedro Nile, we still have him. He's still alive. Spoilers for the future. And we're going forward, and I just I remember being so impressed, just like you said, so impressed with this guy as I was reading this chapter. And then Padan Fane comes in, Ordeith, Wormwood comes in, and I went to myself, I went, oh, that's right, he's already with the Children of the Light. That's immediately following Tome and Head. For some reason, Ordeith with the Children of the Light, I keep thinking in The Shadow Rising. I keep forgetting that he's already with Pedro Nile this early on into the narrative. But I do. My last point about Pedro Nile is I just wanted to point out how awesome and satisfying it was to see him call out Child Bayar on his bullshit. It was awesome. He says to Child Bayar, a few weeks gone I was receiving reports from you that Jeffrem Bornhold was a servant of the Dark One because he moved soldiers onto Toman Head against your orders. His voice became low, dangerously soft. Do you now mean me to believe that Bornhold, as a Dark Friend, led 1,000 of the children to their deaths fighting other Dark Friends? So satisfying. I was just like, eat it, Bayar, eat it! That's what you get.
Oh, that was Carradine, not Bayar.
What? That was Carradine? I thought that was Bayar. Oh, you're right. Jacob, yeah, that's right. Nope, Good call. But yeah, Pedro Nile, badass.
Unless we have more about Pedro Nile, I think this is a really good bridge into lore stuff. Because that scene carries on into a Jakim Carradine point of view, where he returns to his quarters and a Murdral confronts him. And
creepy. Yeah.
So I don't know how common knowledge this is or not, but that Murdral chuckles.
No.
That Murdral laughs. That Murdral
wait
is
a second.
Shidar Haran 1.0.
No way. But Murdral do have
Haran.
humor. You're absolutely. This is confirmed.
This is confirmed.
Oh.
The Murdral that spoke and ordered Jakim Carradine in the Fortress of the Light at the beginning of the Dragon Reborn is like a proto Shidar Haran.
Oh, okay. Well, see, I have an issue with the justification of that, though. I fully accept that it's confirmed and that it's actually canon. It's a thing. But the fact that the Murdral laughs, that it has a sense of humor, that it seems a little more personable. I mean, we know for a fact that Murdral do have a sense of humor, don't we? No, go ahead.
We'll revisit this conversation during the Demandred prologue in Lord of Chaos.
Oh.
When Shidar Haran laughs at him and he goes, "What the hell? A Murdral with a sense of humor?"
Okay, maybe it's not a sense of humor they have. But what's with all this, talk about handing somebody to the Murdral, like the women to the Murdral, because the Murdral have their fun? I guess that's not a humor thing, though.
That is not a humor thing.
No, I guess now
that
I think about it, that is not a fun... No, never mind. Nope. Okay, let's backtrack there. Just because Murdral can be evil perverts doesn't mean that they have a sense of humor, now that I think on it.
Nope. Yeah, no, you're in the hole. We're just going to bury you and move on.
I'm going to just keep digging this way.
So that's lore point number 1. But now we're going to go crazy with the lore, okay?
Oh.
Are you ready for
crazy
this?
With the lore. I'm so ready, Drew.
We are going to talk about parallel worlds and perpendicular worlds.
Oh, okay, cool.
So we know from The Great Hunt with the mirror worlds, right? the worlds of what might have been. These are worlds that exist.
Get myself into.
Yeah.
I'm with you there, buddy.
These are worlds that exist parallel to the real world,
kind of
so
stuff,
to speak.
Right?
Yes, exactly. And as you get further away from what actually happened, the worlds become paler, more insubstantial, harder to get to. But they are all these parallel worlds within the realm of possibility. So these parallel worlds are not just mirror worlds like we see through the portal stones. The universe, the world the Ogier are from, is a parallel world. The world the Aelfin and the Eilfin is from is a parallel world.
Okay. Yep.
They may have different laws of physics. They may have different laws of magic, so to speak. But they are reasonably possible enough that they exist. And that not only do they exist, but people from the real world can achieve travel to them. Now, as we have this scene with Varen talking to Egwene here, when she's doing her preface to Tel'aran'rhiod, she draws the parallel lines, and then she draws a crosshatch over them, and we have the perpendicular worlds. Perpendicular worlds are timelines that are so dissimilar to our own that they exist, but are almost impossible to achieve travel to. Like, if you were to attempt to create a ter'angreal, for instance, like the accepted, testing thing, or a portal stone, to travel to a perpendicular world, it probably wouldn't work. If it did work, it might destroy you. Perpendicular worlds are, instead of, like, shadows of what might have happened, or different, like, what happened but with different physics or different magic or whatever, they are things that are nearly impossible to have happened.
Huh.
So example.
Okay.
An example. I don't know if we actually have an example in the Wheel of Time. It would be something more like the one power never existed, or I don't know, like the
Dark One's
One
prison was never made with a flaw, or something like that, or men never discovered the Dark One's prison, perhaps, or never made
possibly.
the boar.
But well, the interesting thing here is, though, as Varen describes, there are the constants with even the perpendicular worlds.
Yeah.
Where the Dark One is imprisoned
in all of them.
In all worlds, and if he stays imprisoned in one, he stays imprisoned in all. And then there's the paradox: if he's freed in one, he's freed in all. So Robert Jordan went like super metaphysical with his worlds.
He did.
In a couple of paragraphs spread out across the series, and then just never addressed it ever. and let like the really rabid fans like stumble over it and start like driving themselves crazy trying to figure all this stuff out. And if you really want to like dig into it, go to theoryland.com. Go through the interview database. Matt Hatch is the guy's name. He's the founder of Theoryland. He is like, I've never spoken to somebody who is more knowledgeable and invested in the metaphysics of the Wheel of Time. If you want to go into like the philosophy and the world building, this is the guy to talk to. And he's gotten some great opportunities to talk to both Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson about the notes and the world building. If you want to like lose your mind on a deep dive, Theoryland.com interview database, and just like type in Matt Hatch, and then like
Matt Hatch.
Go waste 12 hours of your life.
Oh, this has been Deep Penetrative Lore with Drew. Wow. My God, what is wrong with me today? I just can't articulate words or names. I accidentally called Craig Greg. I just called Andrew Jew for some reason. Like, I don't know.
I don't feel so bad about my dagger-hilted ruby now.
Yeah, I know, right? That's a big old ruby. It's too bad I have to grab it by the dagger, right?
Well, that sounded filthy.
Oh man, I can feel other Rob somewhere going, "Oh, there's a disturbance in the force." You know, we had a previous guest named Rob who was very entertaining guy.
Yeah, he was on our Great Hunt episodes, but so I don't have anything more about lore for right now. But
I have questions
before we go into the final draft. Oh.
Yes. Oh. Questions about just things that have been happening, and I want some more clarification on. So maybe this will give you an idea, Craig, as to like my general knowledge level in the Wheel of Time. So, Drew, Chapter 1. How are all of these women finding Moiraine? Is she Taviran, or rather, like, Taviran by proxy? Because these women can't even explain how they're finding her.
No, they're Blue Aja eyes and ears. She sent pigeons to them.
Yeah, but they themselves can't explain how they're finding her. They just know. They
were told to go to...
No, they specifically say, there's just an inexplicable pull that I'm feeling. I can't explain it, but I knew I had to be here and she would find me. They say that several times, don't they?
Well, there's only one of them that we talked to.
Yes, but Perrin internally thinks about the previous ones and how this conversation's going to go exactly the same every time. Like, he thinks about that.
All right, I'm at the moment here.
Am I just totally off base? Yeah, Craig, do you remember any of these things saying that?
Okay. So Leah says, I knew that if I came this way, someone would find me and take me to her. I just knew.
Yeah.
I have news for her. Okay. So that you're seeing that as like a pull in the pattern.
Yes.
What it is Moiraine sent out pigeons to her eyes and ears and told them, come to this area and people will find you and bring you to me.
And she just doesn't want to explain that she's been in contact with an Aes Sedai? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
No eyes and ears admit to that.
Well, okay. Yeah, good point. Okay. I tentatively accept that. I accept that. Now, in that same chapter, right. Or maybe it might have been the next one, Perrin specifically thinks about how Moiraine has the camp warded, and I used warded with a capital on the W.
Yeah.
Capitanim, I believe that's called. Now that I just discovered that recently. Warded so that no creature of the Dark One would see it unless he walked right into it. So why are Perrin and the Shienarans bothering to shoot down these ravens? Surely a raven that sees nothing is far less suspicious than a massive area where ravens just keep mysteriously disappearing.
Oh. The warding on the camp is just around the camp. They were way outside the camp when they killed the raven.
Okay, good call. All right, thank you. All right, that makes sense. I didn't consider that. Last question, and I think I know the answer. No, I don't think, actually. Who the hell is Sylvie in the Heart of the Stone in Teleron Riyadh, who greets Egwene
Sylvie
and sends her
Lanfear.
back to her bed? Okay. What the hell is up with that incredible amount of pain that happened when she tangled her finger around the Dream Terangriel?
She was messing with Egwene. She was hurting
She was
her.
just torturing her? Like, that wasn't just, some sort of mechanic with the Dream Terangriel and how, I don't know.
So if you remember, a little before that, Egwene, chased after Els Grinwell down the hall and ran into Lanfear.
Yeah, and that was
Lanfear compelled her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and compelled her. But Lanfear was, super annoyed about it.
Yes.
And so, she's getting to the point when Egwene shows up where she's like, all right, you're getting obnoxious where you're getting all up in my plans. So I'm just going to, mess with you and discourage you from doing this.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, Sylvie is Lanfear.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Sylvie's Lanfear. Okay. Not Moghedien.
No.
Lanfear.
No.
Okay. Cool. That's pretty much everything I have to discuss today.
Cool. So Craig, do you have any kind of final thoughts about the Dragon Reborn?
Not thus far. If we were discussing part 2, there's a ton that's coming up. The entire tier episode from all perspectives is as an absolutely magnificent climax to a book, and so I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about that. But for now, I think I'm gonna leave it where we're at least from my perspective. Unless, Drew, you look like you had another question.
Oh no, I was gonna say, as long as it works out schedule wise, we'd love to have you on next week for that climax.
Well, I'll see what I can do. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, as far as final thoughts for Rob, are you?
No, I've pretty much said everything that I wanted to say for the first part. You can bet your ass I'm going to have so much more to discuss in part 2, though. Absolutely. Absolutely. But for now, I'm pretty satisfied. I think we've had a pretty good discussion today, boys.
Cool. So I only have one more thing to kind of go over, and that is how glaringly obvious it is that Shiriam is a dark friend.
Oh, you know what? You just shook something else free. One little piece came tumbling out. You're right, Shiriam. I didn't realize that when they arrived there. I think the chapter was Tar Valon. I forget what number it is.
Yeah.
I hadn't realized until now, doing my first post, Memory of Light deep read, that the Wonder Girls in this scene were literally handed from one Black Aja agent to another. Something I never picked up on before until now.
Yeah, there's so much information that gets lost during the whole handoff into Tar Valon. And then when the first Grey Man attack happens, and then Shiriam is just there.
Yeah.
And that whole conversation Shiriam has with Egwene and Nynaeve is just red flag after red flag after red flag. And I have no idea how I didn't notice that.
Same.
First time
okay, thank you for saying that last part, because I felt like this was all a personal insult toward me, because I did not see it coming for sure.
No, I definitely didn't either. That's his point. Is how did he not see it coming? I guess, right? Like I didn't see it coming.
It's like Brandon Sanderson with some of his Mistborn, foreshadowing.
Thumbs his nose at you in the future. Yes.
Yeah, you get to the end, and you're like, of course that was what was happening. How did I miss it? It was great foreshadowing, phenomenally just deft dialogue to get all the stones laid, but to a point where you're not even paying attention to the bricklayer, and
Nynaeve's point at the end of the chapter, how she goes, and there's one thing that Shiriam forgot to mention. She never wondered who stabbed him. And then as a reader, I'm going, oh, of course. Why didn't I think of that? Oh my God, I must be stupid. That's the only thing I'm left with.
And then the gray woman is found dead in Shiriam's bed with no mark on her, which means an Aes Sedai had to have killed her. Like, it was so clear. How did we, everybody, the collective Wheel of Time community, just right over our heads.
Yep.
And, but yeah,
well done,
so
Mr.
I think that'll bring us to the conclusion of our discussion of the book itself. But now we have the final draft.
Yes.
Rob, do you want to kick us off?
I can kick us off for sure. So I went to the grocery store a couple days ago, and I was looking through their craft brews, and I found this little ditty from a brewery that I have featured on this podcast before. I think I've actually featured them twice on this podcast before. This is either the second or third time. I think this is the third time.
Is it Lost Craft?
No, this is Collective Arts Brewing.
Ooh.
Lost Craft has been twice as well. Nice call, man. Damn. This is Collective Arts Brewing from Hamilton, Ontario. And today I'm drinking an IPA. Apparently it's a hemisphere IPA. I have no idea what that means. But this
That's probably the title, yeah.
Yeah, this is a 6.8% ABV IPA called Ransack the Universe. Right here. You can see a little thing there. Now, it doesn't tie too closely to our discussion today, but I just think it's kind of like a neat little theme that carries on with the dark one throughout the entirety.
Well, doesn't this go right in with the whole discussion of parallel and perpendicular and all that?
Oh, yeah.
I guess, yeah, I wasn't planning on talking about that, but now since Drew, you brought that up, you know what, I can see that. Since Drew brought that up, and thanks, Craig, for reminding me.
Every time you step into Teleron Rio, that's what you're doing. You're ransacking the entire universe.
Ransacking the universe. Yes, thank you, Craig.
Oh, I like it.
Threw me that lifeline up
I like
there.
it. So, Craig, talk to me. What have you been...
Well, because I'm a reasonable person and not a horrific sinner like you guys. It's we started this recording at 2:30 in the afternoon, everybody, and they're all
4:30.
Oh, okay, all right, fine.
It's already well past 5 o'clock here in Ontario.
But,
I just want to point that out.
As the resident old man on this episode, I decided to go with the R.W. Knudsen family just cranberry juice. This is pure cranberry juice.
Oh.
There's no added sugars. There's no nothing.
It's good for detoxification.
It is the bitterest thing that has ever passed my lips, and I love it. So 8 ounces of that will have you pooping like a champ for the next 36 hours.
Nice.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, so for myself, I did bring a thematically appropriate beer, as I promised on the last episode. And this is a double IPA from Odd 13 Brewing in Lafayette, Colorado.
Odd 13 already has it, surely.
And I have to admit, this beer had been pulled off the shelves at the liquor store when I went there. I'd been seeing it on the shelves, and I was like, oh, I got to bring it for the first half of the Dragon Reborn because it's perfect. But apparently it aged out because IPAs are really, really hoppy, right? And
yeah, I would taste grapefruit all
the
day.
hops attenuate a lot, and it turns into more of a malty flavor profile. It's not as bright, not as flavorful. But I told him, I was like, listen, I need this beer for the podcast. So even if it doesn't taste as great as it should, I need it. And so this is the book where we get maybe the biggest Chekhov's gun in the entire Wheel of Time. And that is the turning. The 13 by 13, right? And this beer, and I will put this up to the camera, is called Double 30.
No.
Drew, that you magnificent bastard. Hats off. I'll drink to that one. There's only the ass end of this beer left, but I'll do that.
Yeah, it's
nicely done. Hats off to you.
I saw it like a month or so ago, and I was every time I went back in to get a beer for our podcast episodes, I looked at it on the shelf and I was like, "Yep, that's gonna be the episode when we cover Egwene's accepted test." So
nice, very nice.
Yeah,
sweet.
So I think that that'll bring us to the end here. Yeah, this has been episode 31.
31 episodes
of the Inking Out Loud podcast. I am your host, Drew McCaffrey. With me is my co-host, Rob Santos.
What's up?
And our very special guest, Craig Hanks from the Legendarium.
Thank you so much for coming out here, Craig.
Yeah, and we're just thrilled to be doing the Wheel of Time as always.
Finally.
This series means so much to Rob and myself, and I know like Craig, that was a big step you guys took on your podcast, diving into 14 books of content. So we're happy to have you joining us. And
I will say this, just
forward,
hopefully I can come back for some future episodes as well. But yeah, it's been a little while since I finished this book. But I will say this, I may not be as a long time a fan as you guys. I may not have as much of that deep lore knowledge and all that stuff. But like just about anybody, I think, who reads these books, I've closed book 14 and I was relieved. I was just done. I was like, that's an incredible amount of word count. I can't do this anymore. Book 14, thank goodness I'm done. And then it only took, a week, maybe, before I was like, I wonder, maybe I should crack book 1 again and just kind of get started.
Yeah.
And so...
Welcome to my prison.
And so it's... I may not have kind of, that history and the lore that you guys do have, but I have the love for it that I think a lot of people do. And so I'm glad to be discussing it with you guys and hope that people enjoy the episodes.
Yeah, dude. Thank you so much
for
coming on today.
Absolutely. And for all of our listeners, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you, everybody.